Hello, my name is Sue Keogh and I run a digital marketing agency in Cambridge called Sookio. And we've got some brilliant campaigns to show you today from our work with the NHS, with district councils and with the museum sector. And it's all in the spirit of talking about how to fine tune the activity as you go, looking at all the data and making sure that it becomes better and better and better over time. So I'm joined by two colleagues. We've got Marisa Crimlis-Brown, who's our head of creative, and Clark Chapman, who's our digital strategist. And they're full of tactics and tips and tricks that you can take away and apply to your own campaigns. So I'm going to hop on Zoom and talk to them now, but do fire any questions over as we go. And don't forget to connect with us on social. We're at Sookio and we're all over social media. Okay, so let's kick things off and I'm going to hop on Zoom now and join Clark and Marisa. Hello.
Hello.
So thanks for joining me. So what we've got coming up today, it's going to be in three parts. So firstly, we're going to be looking at defining your audience and goals, where Clark is going to be talking a lot about a brilliant campaign we did recently with the NHS, trying to encourage people to call 111 instead of 999. And then we'll be looking at platforms and content, which is Marisa's specialist area. So we're going to be talking about a great campaign that we did with University of Cambridge Museums Group, which was to encourage people to get back in museums and cultural venues following the pandemic. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at how to test and refine the campaigns as they go. So really looking at the data and then making changes to make sure it becomes more and more successful over time, which is back over to Clark again. And also input from Marisa. We'll be talking all the way through and sharing lots of tips. So now we're going to look at this campaign that we ran very recently with the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Clinical Commissioning Group, which is all about the 111 number, which we're encouraging people to call rather than 999. So the challenge was that during the winter months, the COVID cases were rising again, but there is still a slight lack of awareness of 111 and how it could help people. So quite often people in a bit of a panic would just call 999, not knowing what else to do. And of course, this is putting even more pressure on already overstretched 999 A&E services. And so quite often around here, we get audiences that are quite hard to reach. So there's quite a few rural areas, people might not have English as their first language. So the challenge of the campaign was how to reach those people and get the message across. So it ran on Facebook and Instagram, and we got nearly 700,000 views using a mix of organic and paid activity. So before we go to you, Clark, to really talk about how we defined the nitty-gritty of the audiences and what the goals were in the first place, Marisa, can you just run us through the creative and just tell us about the visuals and the messaging that we used in the campaign?
Absolutely. So obviously, as an NHS campaign, we needed the creative to feel helpful and reassuring, but also interesting enough for people to take notice. So fundamentally, the campaign was all about empowering people to make the right decisions in moments of concern and being aware of the services on offer, because some of them actually surprised us what was on offer, which is great. We also had to be very careful, and I think this is something to really consider when it comes to messaging, because sometimes it's what you don't say that really matters. For example, sometimes the mere mention of hospital, like 70% of people go to the hospital when they could have dialed 111 instead, that will have the adverse effect and actually encourage people to go to the hospital. So that's tapping into negative social norms, like everyone's doing it, so should I, even if it's the wrong connotation there. So that's something to consider. But yeah, essentially this was an empathetic campaign. So we are really offering simple and helpful information and friendly facts about 111. So nothing condescending or preachy. We weren't giving advice and just empowering our audience instead. What we wanted to do was capture people when they were at their best. So just lazily scrolling social media to know where to turn when they were at their worst, or to help friends and families as well. So we all know the helplessness that you feel with a potential health crisis. And this is compounded, I think, when you're dealing with audiences that are, say, new at something, like parents of young children, or if English isn't your first language, because I really can't imagine a more frightening experience than trying to communicate symptoms in a language that isn't, that you're not as familiar with. So to cut through the noise, we used very colorful content, and we did strip back to very simple active messaging. So there's nothing extraneous to be found. And we really wanted people to see themselves in the subjects chosen. So we have a really nice range of races and ages and, people of all sorts, so that you could really see yourself there. And the content was created in English as well as subsequent languages. So I think Clark will speak to that a little bit with the data and who we were trying to target. But we also used things like carousel posts, which was all about sort of actively getting people. So that's when you slide through content on Instagram. And that was about actively getting people to be involved, which helps the information lodge in your brain a little bit differently. So instead of being a passive viewer, you're really an active participant. So that was great, but we did have video to test against as well as standalone imagery. And lastly, the most important thing I think here was that we really encouraged people to save and share the content. So even though it may not apply to them, maybe they weren't the parents of young children, or, their language was English, their primary language, but they may know friends or neighbors or parents or something that weren't as comfortable. So we thought you can actively support the people that you love to take the right course of action if they're in an emergency situation.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Marisa, and particularly how by encouraging people to interact with the content, it really helped it sink in. I thought that's really powerful. So Clark, let's talk about audiences and goals and how to define them. So on this campaign, where did you start with all of that?
So in terms of the goals, the number one goal really when setting up any of these types of campaigns is, what do you actually want it to achieve? What is the ultimate aim of the campaign? Is it to get them to take a certain action? Is it to take an action on a website? Is it to take an action, which in this case was actually to take action that was offline? So we want people to do stuff that's not directly trackable with this particular one, when it comes to obviously ringing 111 or using other local health services that maybe were slightly underutilized. So that was another interesting element of how we were setting out the goals, because it wasn't just about getting people to ring 111, it was also raising awareness of the other local health services that weren't being fully utilized in the areas. And this is where we that was our main goal, is in terms of setting that out. In terms of setting out the audience, you've always got certain limitations with audience, because this was a Cambridgeshire-wide campaign, because it represents the Cambridgeshire the clinical commissioning group. So that's obviously an important part, that we knew the area we had to target, but also not just where they are physically, but also where they are online. So that's why we chose Facebook and Instagram, because we thought these two platforms are going to give enough wide breadth of the generational gap as well between it. So we covered all those elements of the ages. So we knew from our data that older people tend to be more engaged on the Facebook ads, and the younger people hit the Instagram. So we were keen to cover it. Whereas if we just gone with one platform, particularly for this area, we may have missed out on certain areas. And this campaign was very much an inclusive campaign to say everyone needs these health services. It's not, there are certain areas obviously of any society that maybe use more of the health services, but this was about raising awareness across all ages. So that was kind of with the audience. And then also when defining the audience, think about where there's opportunities that, because everyone knows the NHS, but do people know about the clinical commissioning group? Who's following the clinical commissioning group's social media profiles already? So think about how you can tap into those audiences. And the reason why they can be really useful, that they may be more keen to do things like Marisa said. If you're already following and getting updates, you then more likely to then share those updates because you're more engaged with that organization anyway. So we tried to use that as well as a starting point.
So one thing that you find in these healthcare campaigns, though, is that sometimes the goals that we're being set, they're not quite so difficult to measure. So when we're talking about reducing pressure on the NHS or raising awareness, there's so many other contributing factors to that. And if pressure is reduced on the NHS, then we can take credit for that. But there's loads of other factors that are influencing that. So where do you start with setting goals and key performance indicators around some of those broad challenges that we've got?
I mean, that to me, that was the really interesting, one of the really interesting things about this campaign as well, because there wasn't that direct, like if you're tracking, like we did with the app installs, where we're trying to get people to download the NHS app, that was much more tangible to track in certain ways, because we knew how many clicks went through to the store. Whereas when it comes to, like you said, it's much more almost kind of like your old-fashioned billboard ad campaigns where you know people are seeing it because we know the data is telling us that these are going on people's news feeds, but how that directly impacts in terms of local service provisions and how people are using those things is slightly more challenging. I think that's always going to be part of these type of brand awareness campaigns, and that's where it's more of the messaging was much more supportive, and it was much more of a helpful element. I think where we do have the advantage over the more traditional ads, of like the billboard ads, for example, is that we could know, at least with like carousel ads, how many people were flicking through the carousels, or how many people were liking the ads, or how many people were commenting. So we at least had some data to know, actually, are people engaging with these in any way, and we could change tact if we needed to. So yeah, that's in terms of measuring it, that was, it's never 100%. And like you said, there are so many contributing social factors that go into why certain local health provisions are. But I like to think that with the amount of people we reached across the county, we would have had some impact. And again, our engagement stats can tell us that, but it's just not, we can't know exactly someone saw that ad and then directly went. And like Marisa made a good point as well, is that it was also people saving these for another time. So it might not necessarily they needed it at that time. So the results of these campaigns could be the next year or 18 months, we could see the impact of this ad campaign, which is a really interesting way of looking at it as well.
So you're trying to assess the data from as many different touch points as possible, really, aren't you, to give you a fuller picture, even if you can't assess everything in one go. And so is that a typical challenge for a healthcare campaign like this, would you say?
I think so. I think it is. I think what was great about this challenge, we obviously had another challenge in terms of the particular communities within Cambridgeshire we had to target. So Marisa mentioned about the people that English is not a first language. And that was really interesting, because we had to change the entire creative to hit that. But also it's how you target those people as well, because some people do use the platforms in other languages, and we were able to do that with certain languages where there was enough of a threshold. So we used, for example, Polish was one of the languages we targeted. And we know there are in particular areas of Cambridgeshire which are probably less have access to these things, and the type of jobs they're doing as well. They're maybe not online all the time. It's not a natural thing to get them. So there's certain times of the day we were looking at that. So that was definitely one challenge, just in terms of how engaged they are. But we actually found them to be really helpful, because what we're doing is, because it wasn't just the messaging we did, which we actually used a translator, because it's really important with this stuff. If you're going to do it translating, not to try and just use Google Translate and hope for the best. You do need professionals in, because just different languages have different nuances of how messages come across, and we had to make sure that that wasn't the case. So we were very keen to make sure it was speaking their language, and really speaking their language to kind of come across. So that was an interesting challenge.
And that leads on to my next question, which is thinking beyond this campaign. What are the sort of mistakes that people make, or things they forget to do when they're setting up a campaign and thinking about defining those audiences and goals at the beginning?
I think, so in terms of the mistakes, I've got a couple. Certainly narrowing the audience too small at the start. Now, with the non-English speaking ads, we had to, because obviously you've only got a certain amount of people who can speak those languages first as their language. But I think what people often do is, at the start of a campaign, they almost have this idea that I know exactly who the audience is. I know everyone who's going to hit this. I know exactly it's the age between this, and it's this person who's interested in this, and they use it at this point. And they definitely, to me, the issue with that is you're not using what the ad and the organic data can actually provide you, because you've gone too small too soon. Whereas if you go slightly larger, you have an ability to go, well, we've seen this particular segment of the audience is reacting to this, and this particular segment's reacting to this content. So it kind of, I think starting too narrow can be an issue. When it comes to the data, one of the biggest issues is, excuse me, is at the start, is thinking about how you're going to set your data out, how you're going to read your data. And that one of the reasons to do that is too many variables. So if at the start, if you said, right, we've got 5 ads running, and they're all going to have different images, different messages, different headlines, different landing pages, everything's different, and different interests you're targeting. And then somehow you're going to come up with a cohesive idea of actually to draw any kind of conclusions from that. It's not going to happen. So it's actually going back to basics and going, okay, what is week 1? What are the first things we want to test? Let's test the images, which is what we did. Then week 2, whichever image we felt did better, let's then test the message, the accompanying message. And then let's test the headline. And being really almost scientific with how you kind of get the data is really important. I think that's often, sometimes people just start, and it's understandable. We're all busy. There's things going. There's the excitement about getting the creative for the campaign, But actually, if you don't set things up at the start to get a good testing regime in place, you're going to miss out on too much. And then finally, just relying too much on the accuracy of the platform. I think this is a thing where some people often think that, well, if I put in people interested in this or people interested in that, then Facebook or Instagram will absolutely know 100% that's it. But it's just not true. Like the platforms themselves are still learning information about people. So don't assume that everything you put into the platform in terms of, say, interest is 100% accurate. There can be, it could be someone just visited that page and just wasn't necessarily interested in it, but has gone into the interest bucket for that thing. So it's just thinking about how the platform actually gathers its targeting as well as a useful thing to do.
So your key takeaways from this, if I've got this correct, so don't start too broad with the, sorry, don't start too narrow with the audience, start broad and then work your way in. Don't start off with too many variables, because then if you change maybe the wording on one ad and then the picture as well, you don't know which one is being most effective. And don't trust all the platforms and the data they're giving you. Would you say that's a fair summation?
Yeah, I think that's it, because I mean, a good example, here's a good example that I always use is, one of the campaigns we did for the NHS was the app install. So if you look on and the problem was we couldn't actually see the download data because the NHS app is a national app that we don't have access to that data. So even though we may see Facebook say there's been 1,000 clicks, we don't necessarily know that that's converted into 1,000 people downloading the app. So it's things like that. It's actually trying to just work. That don't say just because Facebook said 1,000 that people have clicked on the ad, but it doesn't mean the website loaded. It doesn't mean they've taken the action you want. It's just the first step that the ad has got them to do. So it's thinking about that aspect of it as well.
Okay, right. Thank you, Clark. We're going to have a bit of a gear shift now from healthcare to the arts. And so we really want to tell you about a campaign that we ran with the University of Museums Group, which is 7 museums, a botanic garden, and various partners that they had as well, including a concert hall and some other museums. So all of these incredible cultural venues in and around Cambridge. And it was funded by the Cultural Recovery Fund. And the goal was to encourage footfall in museums and all of these other cultural venues following all the challenges that they'd had due to the enforced closures with COVID. And so it wasn't just to get audiences back in the museums, it was also to encourage local residents to visit for the first time. So we gave it the tagline, "Come on in." So trying to kind of beckon people through these rather austere doorways. And it ran largely on Instagram Reels, coupled with some paid activity on Facebook, lots of really great video content, and this nice ident as well with the these little boots going around, "Come on in," which we're all big fans of. And so got really good results. So 800,000 impressions across Cambridgeshire, 6,000 clicks to the website, 19,000 video views, and all for a pretty modest ad budget. You know, we didn't blow the budget on this one, and we got some really good results. So Marisa, just before I ask you a bit more about the context behind it and why we chose these platforms and developed this content, can you just talk us through the visuals again and the creative, just to tell people a bit more about what they're seeing?
Absolutely, yes. So this was a very emotive campaign. So I don't know if you remember the frenzy and euphoric feeling of the first post or pandemic lockdown opening up again. So that's what we're talking about here. Get back in that headspace. And it was very much about how do the museums welcome people in, but make them feel safe. So it's that kind of harnessing and honing back into what you miss about these venues. And also, is it worth the risk, so to speak? You know, are they taking my safety seriously? So that's what we were trying to do here. And we really wanted to hone in on very emotional, emotive content and what you missed about seeing friends, about loved ones, about experiences and the arts and culture. But we also wanted to make it feel friendly enough to welcome, I'm going to say hard to reach audiences, but in the sense of Cambridge can be very foreboding to some people. They have big, scary doors and you don't know where to enter. You know, if you're not used to it, it can feel very not for us, so to speak. So the reels, we were trying to make them approachable, fun, and really informative, but in a highly visual and kind of beautiful way. And again, fun with things like the ident to give it a bit of personality.
Fabulous. And so just tell me a little bit, you mentioned Instagram Reels. So there were so many ways that we could have gone with this campaign, and it was such a joy to work with such established organizations, so respected and well loved in the area. So you could have gone in any direction. So how did you decide which channels and content would be so effective?
So I always think at the beginning of a campaign, you want to talk about what do you want to achieve with the budget that you have, because there's always a budget, and the team resources. And that is really critical, especially in the arts, which is sort of famously, that you're dealing in quite small teams. You can't do everything, and you certainly can't do everything well. So what are you trying to accomplish? And I think also this sort of harkens to Clark's points, but what mindset is your audience in on the platforms they're on? Because I actually don't think, it's not just older people on Facebook. It's not, you'll find niche pockets everywhere on all these platforms. But what is the mindset that they're in? Is it the evening? Are they on a business minded mindset, like perhaps LinkedIn is more attuned to, or are they thinking about friends and family and, what are they doing here? So that is kind of the most important thing. And then the other thing that came up early in conversation when we were having these early meetings, one of the venues had said, oh, should we be on TikTok? And you could tell there was this real resistance, and they didn't really just want to jump into it. And we looked and we saw that most of these venues were on Instagram, but none of them were yet on Reels, which was a new thing at the time, really, especially for cultural venues, which are sort of slower to adapt sometimes. So we thought, well, this is a perfect happy medium because they want to reach new audiences. And at the time, Instagram was really pushing Reels. So organic content had stratospheric reach because they were really fighting for market share against TikTok here. So they were really pushing Reels, which they continue to do now, actually. And so that was really good because we wanted new audiences and we wanted this highly visual, beautiful content. So perfect, let's do it. And then see if from there, if they had an appetite for Reels, well, then maybe they had an appetite for TikTok. So it was very experimental and a sort of interesting, but highly risk-free way to do this new learning.
And then when deciding on the creative itself, how did you come to these decisions about what content to create? Because I know you'll have understood personally what sort of content would go down well, but how much did you look at the data and to make your decision here?
So for us, it was, part of the cultural funding was about trying new things. So we were looking at, in terms of the Reels, it was very much, well, where are our new audience residing? Where can we get the most bang for our buck? Because again, cultural venues, they're charitably funded. So we're not just going to have wild budget to spend here. So how can we be the most effective as possible? And so this is where Clark helped with the, because we obviously had the organic side as well as the ad side. So what would have the most impact for the ads? And that was great because Clark had some range, which was the Reels themselves, which was interesting organically, but then also we created so this is all shot in vertical format, but then we could also shoot in landscape to be more effective for Facebook. And this allowed Clark to have a bit of give in terms of his ad strategy.
And did you look at the competition as well, just to see what else is going on in this space?
Well, this is really interesting because, as I said, there wasn't much competition at the time because Reels was so new. So we had a little glimpse around, and what we saw is actually there isn't a lot of cultural venues certainly doing Reels content, but we did gather some interesting techniques from other, Reels, whether it's influencers or whatever, to see what strikes a chord. But what we wanted to do is capture all the things that you missed about going to a venue. So we pulled, their key audiences, we pulled our wider audiences to see what did you miss. And then we we created a series. So whether it was experiencing like the knowledge or just the fun of it, or children and faces, or the creativity, the shops and the cafes, you don't just have to go for the actual learnings, so to speak. And then the oddities, that was a really fun one to film.
And what did you learn from the first posts that we published, and how did that go on to shape the ongoing content over the course of the campaign?
Yeah, so the learning, it's always great to watch in terms of how our audiences are responding. But for us, it was also because it was a seasonal campaign. So it began in this summer reopening. So as I say, the euphoria, but also the hesitation to re-enter venues. That was very attuned to the sort of joie de vie of coming to life again, reopening. What did you miss? How can we bring people together? And then as the campaign went on, it was more practical, but also tuning into the seasonal elements. And then obviously culminating at Christmas, which had some, shopping elements to it and festivities involved as well.
And did, Clark, I think you had some guidance as well for the team on what would work particularly well with campaigns. So we weren't just shooting nice video content. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
I think what we were doing throughout the campaign, and Marisa talked about, because Reels was so new, it was really exciting as well to work on it. So we were able to, the great thing about the Reels, because it's quite short content, we were able to test a lot of it quickly, as in over a very short space of time, you were able to run lots of videos compared to maybe there's more longer form videos. So we kind of wanted, that's why I think that's starting with the Reels, running that throughout the campaign. And then that kind of led into a nice crescendo at the end, which was this really kind of beautiful sort of 90-second, which seems short still, but actually 90 seconds is long when we're talking about social media ads. And we kind of produced it, which was more like a culmination of all the different museums. So what I think was really good about the reel was it was a nice kind of example of sections of the different museums. And this nice video at the end brought everything together to go, this is a community of museums around Cambridge. So I think, and that was kind of, we wanted to have that nice final pop at the end. And a lot of that was targeting people that had already engaged with other of some of the reels. So they may not have seen about other elements, other museums that maybe they just hadn't seen because they might not have been on the platform that week or that kind of stuff. So it allowed us to see this nice final and actually make it just I think it's just a very proud, nice piece about the kind of culture you can get in Cambridge as well. So I thought that was a really nice way of it. You're using the short form content to build up to this nice crescendo video at the end, which just says, this is now the end of the campaign. It was a beautiful kind of winter focus coming into Christmas video. So that was, but I think Reels gave us the opportunity to really test lots of things because it's short form. We can produce a lot of it, which I think is great. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And yeah, that video was really beautiful. I found it quite moving actually, and particularly against some of the other Christmas content you get out there, which can be a bit brash in your face. So it's really, really nice. So Marisa, what were the things that we were testing and measuring as we went through? Very much like the 111 campaign, you can't, we're talking about footfall and museums. So there's all sorts of other factors to influence that, from the weather to, what else people might have going on in their diaries. So what were we testing and measuring to see if the campaign was a success?
Yeah, so here there is the benefit, so well, if you can call it that, but because of COVID, there was a lot of online booking, which didn't previously used to be the case. So technically speaking, we were monitoring this, but also just in terms of the creative and seeing the goodwill that was being generated, we were looking at, because I do find likes can be, mostly vanity metrics. They don't necessarily tell you a lot, but meaningful comments. So we had a lot of nostalgic posts and people who either missed Cambridge or said, yes, I must go back, or we've never been, or tagging their friends. That's really great. Obviously, it's the same as well with people saving them or sharing them, because in marketing, word of mouth, if I share something, well, then my friends know, like, okay, well, she likes museums, this must be pretty good, or, same with the rest of us. So that is, worth its weight in gold, I would say, a good share. But also, when it comes to testing and measuring, well, who's responding to what? So how this engagement, we will put faces, for example, faces always do quite well. People really like to see others' experience. So we had one of the reels was very highly focused on faces. The other was more about these oddities, like little things that kept you surprised and delighted. So that was another one. And then of course the practical elements, like, whether it is the shops, what's available in the shops, what's available in these cafes, do I have to book, elements like that, or the friendly staff. That was really key. Are there people there? Will they support me? Will they answer my questions or help me feel at ease? So again, these were different elements, so we could see who was responding to sort of what type of content, and that was across Facebook, Instagram posts, and Instagram Reels.
And just to pick up on what we were saying in the first section, it's so important to decide what you're going to measure at the beginning. And I've seen that happen quite a lot actually, where a campaign runs, this is not with us, but other people. And near the end, they think, oh, we should really have taken a measurement of what the followers were on Twitter at the start. And oh, now we don't know how much it's grown. So that is something that people forget to do a lot. And thinking about engagement, Clark, there was something that tickled you. Some of the engagement that we got in some of the comments are very Cambridge, weren't they?
There was a Greek philosophical debate in one of the comments, which was really interesting. But actually, that's good because then more comments are getting, then your ad costs are going down slightly as well. So it helped us in terms of the campaign. Obviously, with the organic, it was being seen by more people. And just following up from what Marisa said as well, what was really good about this campaign, I think, from a testing perspective of. It's often, I think the mistake is ad copy has to be always really the inspirational ad copy. But actually part of the ad copy for this was us telling things like opening times, which is really important, like the functional element of these organizations as well. It's not just, it's great, the amazing stuff and the history and the different elements you can see within these organizations, but actually use the ads and the organic content to actually inform people of just basic information of when is this open, because I'm really inspired, but and you can use the ad copy because often people may not click through to the website to find that information out, but you can put it into, like, for example, the headline to go, we're open 9 till 5 and on these days, or we're open weekends. And we were doing that with what I thought was really interesting, how we use the half term. So we were building up to the half term saying we're open during half term and we're open these hours. And like Marisa said, it's reaching parents and those people that we know are going to be engaged with it, that are going to bring their kids along to come to it. So it's finding moments within the calendar as well that you can tap into, particularly I think for museums and those kind of attractions. I think it's really important because with the half term, we got the parents' ads, we got loads of engagement on those because people were sharing it with other people saying, oh, are you taking your kids to that? Oh, it's a great idea. And they didn't even think about it. And that's what that was part of it, was to raise awareness in a way that we know is practical for them, thinking, well, again, I'm not a parent myself, but I know my sister and I know always thinking of things to come up with and what to do over the half term. Well, we could tap into that. So it's using that really well. So yeah. That was cool.
Spot on, because it really was. I mean, I don't know if you remember that time, but you couldn't rely on Google. All the information you previously know no longer was accounted for anymore. So now it was, because some venues I know, were just open Wednesday afternoon. So it was really nice to be able to actively support these people, because especially what we were trying to reach was people further afield to Cambridge City Centre. So if you're going to get on a train and make the effort, you want to be sure it will be open, that that you had to book a ticket, whatever it was.
And Marisa, just thinking a bit more about mistakes to avoid, are there any sort of schoolboy errors that people make all the time when deciding on the platforms and the channels and the content?
I think sometimes, I mean, obviously I'm a big fan of being realistic, because I think you could do anything to whatever degree, but you want to be realistic and you want to lay out the expectations early in terms of the team. So what do you feel confident in? Which is really great about this, because we were we were permitted to sort of upskill these teams. So we created little training sessions on photography and social media filming and copywriting and some other things, I think, which is great because that empowered every team member to be able to help us create some of this content. And then therefore they could go and shoot their own content in a much more confident fashion, which is great because actually none of these venues were doing reels previously. And now I think most of them are, which is great. So you see that. And I also think people can be very frightened about, oh, well, this won't look polished enough. This won't look right, so we just won't do it. And actually, again, a bit like the social norms thing, it probably has the adverse effect where it feels more authentic to your audience if it's a bit gritty and unpolished. So it was really nice because we could shoot some polished footage for them, but we also used user-generated content, which matched them up really nicely. And I think that has better results because it feels very true to form of what your the expectation. So that's what I would say, really.
So what would you say your key learnings are? So you're talking about being realistic and doing what you can within budget, and then also making sure that you're not so, striving for so much perfection that you don't put anything out at all. Any other sort of key learnings from this experience?
Yeah, I suppose really get to the bottom of who you're trying to reach and why. And then I think the content, the creative will follow, and the platforms. Take notice of the results. So, make sure that you're seeing what has meaningful content, what's really resonating with your audience. And don't be afraid to make changes based on that, I would say. But when you are making changes, don't change everything at once, because then you can't, Clark will always say, like, you want to be sure that you can track this data. So if you're going to change the copy, don't change the creative, and vice versa, that sort of thing.
We've looked at healthcare, we've looked at museums, and now we're going to talk you through a campaign that we ran with Huntingdonshire District Council, which actually started off as one campaign, then turned into another, and then we added more on, and then, you know, just did so much work with them. It was all fantastic. And it was all in the spirit of trying to encourage footfall again in the high street and encourage people to support their local businesses, their local shops in these 4 market towns in Huntingdonshire. And so we found Facebook to be a particularly effective platform here. And we ran lots of very highly targeted paid activity, lots of activity on Instagram and Twitter, regular updates. And we were continually testing and refining, learning from each campaign, applying it to the next, so that we knew that all the video content we're putting out there, all the photography was really telling the stories of the people that we're trying to support. And so in one campaign alone, we reached 220,000 people across Huntingdonshire and the surrounding areas, with campaign ads featuring nearly 800,000 times on Facebook and in the Instagram feeds. And so, yeah, Marisa, if you could just talk us through. And what I really loved about the approach you took was this real focus on the human stories. So it really felt, particularly when we're talking about a district council, it really felt like people were hearing from their peers, from their local residents, from their neighbours, instead of it being kind of a top-down campaign from the council. So just tell us a little bit about the visuals that we're seeing at the moment.
Fantastic. So again, I need to bring you back to this COVID time, early days. And what was great about the Think Local campaign is that, you know, as the local government was really trying to actively support their high streets, which were of course suffering based on the uncertainty and the ordering, and also things like hours, you know, what capacity did people have? And so of course it made it harder as local residents to shop there, because you literally didn't know if it was open. You didn't know anything, right? So we wanted to bring the village and town high streets to life. And the best way to do that really is to get to know the people, get to know what they love to do and why they're experts, why they put all their heart and soul into the shops that they have and what they do. So we did this with a series of content, like you said. So that was from interviews, beautiful photography, really idyllic videos that were almost like tourism videos of each market town, time-lapse videos of what it felt like to walk the high street. So really getting back on the ground. And we created a number of Instagram guides. So again, this was an early feature. Instagram guides was quite new at the time. And we thought, well, let's say, imagine you want to bring your nan somewhere, or someone who, you know, might be slightly risk adverse to try something new. Well, what would make you bring her to this market town? And so you'd have to know, you know, what shops are available, what restaurants are there, what sites are there to see, you know, is it worth your time to explore? So that was a lot. That was at the heart of what we were doing. But we also created some really splashy, fun stuff with some partners like Click It Local. We did some really kind of fun, kind of kooky campaigns to let people know that they could order local products to their door through the scheme, which was really fun.
In the first 2 sections, we're looking very much at setting things up correctly. So defining audiences and goals, deciding on the right platforms and developing the right content. Whereas in this section, it'd be really interesting to explore a bit more about what we did when things were up and running. So what we tested, what we refined as we went along. So Marisa, in these campaigns, what were we testing? What was it that the client wanted to know? What did they want us to measure?
So really, this was an awareness campaign. What was it? So through infographics or whatever it might be, what is it that we're trying to see? So we wanted people to be sharing, we wanted people to be commenting, which again we saw a lot of in terms of, you know, did you know this place existed? Did you know? We wanted to help people, especially for, like Clark mentions, for children or for a date night. You know, how can you go and have a good time? Where could you go? Where can you go and shop locally instead of, say, the big box stores that did quite well in the pandemics? So that was what we were primarily looking at through the organic content. And then Clark, of course, ran a series of advertising campaigns to let people know about certain things. So he could probably speak to that.
Yeah, so Clark, our master of metrics. So tell us a bit about the tools that you use. So, you know, it's all very well to say, okay, so you just measure the engagement, or you just measure footfall or whatever, you know. So what kind of tools are you using to get a handle on all of this?
So there's, I mean, for us with this campaign, there were 2 main tools that we use. So that, I mean, for me, the ads manager itself, I mean, it's an abundance of data, and it's what's great about it is real live data as well. So you're seeing things updated on a regular basis. So that tells you everything from the click-through rate, how often percentage people are clicking through to the page you want to go to, from all kind of things of how many impressions are you getting, so how many times the ad's being seen or the content's being, and how many people it's reaching. So all those kind of stuff is in there. But we also used Sprout Social for this campaign, which is why I love Sprout Social, mainly for one reason, because you can tag campaigns, which for us was really good. So what historically what you've found is you've had to sort of pull out, particularly organic, and this was really good for organic the campaigns that Marisa was working on, was the ability to set, because obviously HDC is a council, they've got other things going on with their content. It wasn't just the Think Local campaign running, but Sprout Social, we were able to separate that from an organic perspective, which is really useful. It's so much easier on ads, but to do it organically is really useful. So we knew every week in our reporting, we could say we did 50 posts around the Think Local campaign, and it'd separate from the other thing. We wouldn't just get the general organic data across, whether it's to do with a parking thing that might be totally separate. So I found Sprout Social was really helpful for things like that. So that's a tool we've used quite a lot as well during the campaign.
And I really like tapping into, sorry, just to say that it was really great to be able to tap in, because you could see people sharing this, like, you know, the town pride, and yes, look what we have right here on our doorstep. So you could see that sort of pride coming through, as well as you saw really, you know, it was well received by the residents as well as the sort of the shopkeepers themselves. And it boosted the council because people could see that the goodwill towards the council, that they were actively trying to support both residents and the shopkeepers themselves.
And we know ourselves from working so closely with the council that there is a real genuine, you know, desire to do this internally as well. It wasn't just, okay, we need to outsource a campaign to do, you know, there was this real kind of sense of urgency with it to support local residents, local businesses after this, you know, devastating pandemic had come along. So, right, Clark, the big question that everybody always asks is how much to spend. So we did this campaign, we got all these results, you know, we didn't have millions to play with. So how do you set a budget? How do you come up with, you know, reasonable amount that you want to spend?
I mean, in terms of the budget, I mean, I'm I'm going to be the bearer of bad news. Unfortunately, there is no single factor to tell you that it doesn't exist. That's not possible. But I can certainly give people a bit of an insight into things to consider when coming up with the budget. So one is going to be your audience size. That's going to have an impact, because if you've got a smaller audience size, it's just going to take less money to reach that audience, because you've just got not as many people to get in front of. Now that does slightly depend on how competitive that particular audience is. If they particularly use that platform more than, say, that particular age, maybe more competitive on certain platforms. But again, as a general rule, the smaller the audience, it's going to cost a little bit less, unless it's really targeted. So that's one thing to consider. Location as well is something to consider. So how many we obviously were targeting Huntingdonshire, but we're in an ecosystem with other businesses as well, local businesses that are competing on that, and that you're all competing for this ad space. So and that's really what it is. It's an auction system, these things. So you're based on, so each day your costs can change as well. So setting your budget can be challenging in that, because one day there may be a ton of competitors that are raising your cost up, because you're going to have to pay more to get on the feed. And another time there may be less competitors that day, which is going to keep your ad cost down. So that's something to consider as well, in terms of what other businesses maybe like ours and other campaigns. And because in this, which was really interesting, we were running an e-commerce campaign through a public campaign, which I thought was really interesting, because you never get to do that. So the creative came up with, we did a lot of videos around actually selling products, because one of the things was, when COVID happened, the shops were closed. We still needed to maintain them to be able to sell. So we were then in an ecosystem competing against similar products as well, which is really interesting, which we don't often get in this thing. And again, that can impact it. Time of the year can have an impact on budget. So consider if you're selling products at Christmas, it's probably the ad costs are going to go up. So consider that when coming up with your budget. You're probably going to spend more, but then if you're going to have to spend more, it probably means the more potential customers are there. So it's kind of a bit of a chicken and eggs thing as well. And then, and demographics is a big one. Think about this platform. If it's Instagram or Facebook, who is more likely to be using that? Who are we trying to target? And those kind of things can be really, so it's a multitude of factors to consider. And also thinking, what is the ultimate aim of the campaign, and how much do we think is a reasonable amount to spend, and think about that and that's something you'll only know yourself in terms of what's a realistic element. So yeah, it's lots of factors that go in, so do consider all of them when coming up with the budget.
So it's really interesting what you say about the budgets changing from day to day, because that's something that people might not realize. You kind of think, right, it's going to cost me 500 quid, boom, that's that done. You may not realize. But the thing is, when there is so much data to play with, how often are you looking at it? And how often is that affecting your decisions about what to do? Because I imagine it can be quite easy to think, right, we've got a spike in activity, right, brilliant, let's change everything, we'll do more of that, or this isn't working, and you decide that after 24 hours and bin the whole campaign. How often should you be looking at the data, and how much should this influence your decisions about the content and the activity?
I think as a general rule, I would say once a week. Really fight the urge to make daily changes, because the problem with that is if you're testing at the start going, right, we're going to run these 3 ads against each other this week, you need to generate enough data with what you've got. And it's so tempting, like you said, to go, oh my God, look, that's spiked and that's really exciting, and then let's just change it now 2 days in. But it might have just been seen by more people at that particular time. Facebook will make decisions quite early as well in terms of data, so you want to avoid doing that. So I think minimum a week, just to give yourself that, at the end of the week, going, right, each of these ads has had the ability to be seen. It's got enough data. We can at least start to glean an idea which is doing better. So I'd say weekly is the best way to start. If you really, it's very tempting, and I'm always there, and I'm like, no, don't do it, because you're just not going to get the useful data at the end of it.
And we've spoken in the other 2 sections about common mistakes that people make. Is this something that you'd say that people do? They either don't let it run for long enough, or they're making too many changes as they go. What are those kind of mistakes that you see?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think one, like you said, is definitely making decisions too soon. So thinking, oh, well, we've got 10 click through to the website, that means that video must be the creative that's the best. But actually then if you ran it for maybe another couple of weeks, you actually might find it go the other way, but you've not given it the time to do that. So making decisions too soon, making changes on a daily basis, I would avoid. So again, this is just preparation when doing anything like this. Just prepare yourself and go, what do we want to find out? What are we trying to achieve with the campaign? That is fundamental. But also this is another thing that happens, because we can get quite protective over our creative. I mean, me and Marisa don't, because we work very well together, so we're brilliant. We get it, we understand this, but you can so easily, you have an idea about where you want the creative to go, but if the data is telling you it's not working, sometimes just park the pride and go, you know what, I do need to move on from this, and go, it's just not working. And it's okay, because that's what creative is. And it doesn't mean it's not working completely, but it's not working effectively enough to justify spending the money on it. Because we all engage differently. We all find certain different content different. So I think it's actually having the ability to go, okay, that's my idea, but it's not working. Another mistake people don't do enough is they don't check enough how many times on average people have seen their creative and their ads. Really important, because if you've seen the same ad 10 times, all of a sudden that fun campaign and the organization that's running that campaign, you can start getting quite annoyed at, and that's not what you want to run ads for. You don't want to get to the point where there's a bit of a brand damage, because people are thinking, I'm so sick and tired of seeing that on my newsfeed. I've seen it like 8 times. So always check how many times people are seeing it. And where possible, this is one mistake which a lot of people do, is try and set up tracking so you know the ads are actually what they're doing once they click on the ad and they go on to the website. Are they? So we were able to see a spike in purchases on the Click It Local website through the ads. So we worked with their team to kind of set up some tracking on their analytics.
What do you actually mean, set up some tracking? What does
so
that mean?
So for example, setting up to say so we can directly know that an ad takes it to a certain page, and then what they do on that. So say, for example, with the Click It Local, we wanted people to buy local goods because they couldn't go and buy them in the shops because of COVID. We were able to set up, each shop had its own tracking code, so we could go, right, well, we know that ad was running because it's a unique URL or unique website that it went through, and then we go, and what that does is it means also you can say, oh, these ads are actually working, because what you don't want to do is assume that oh, they're great, we're getting loads of clicks, these ads are brilliant, but then nothing's happening on the website because there might be issues that way. It tells you want to try and get information on both sides. So doing that as best you can is really useful. And then that comes into just people sometimes I've seen confuse click-through rate with conversion rate. And that's exactly that point. It's the amount of percentage of clicks is not the same as what actions people take on the website. They're two very different things. And it's just getting clear about things like that.
So basically, I think Clark could say that data is a very humbling process. And it makes it fun because often we'll sometimes sort of bet against each other to say like, oh, I think this messaging will work. Like, oh, this creative. And then no matter who's on the team, someone will be humbled by it.
I think that's why it's so good, isn't it? Because then you're marrying everything together. You've got your brilliant experience and your personal opinions and your sort of judgment about what's going to work. And then the data sometimes just gives you that opposite impression, doesn't it?
Well, I think that's one thing for me, I would say, is don't make the assumption at the start of these, because what we found with, again, I'll come back to the e-commerce Click It Local campaign we did to support local high street. I really liked that because we tested lots, and you could assume, well, toys are going to be bought by this particular age or particular products, but we were trying beauty products across all demographics, because don't think, well, that's who is the end user of the product, is not necessarily the person who's going to buy it through the ads. And that's really important. So it might be a birthday present for somebody, but I wouldn't be targeted, but I might buy a birthday present for my mum. But what I'm being, so don't assume I'm not going to be targeted. It's thinking about actually people buy stuff for other people. It's don't just think, right, well, they're the only people that use that. So that's the only people I'll target, because people don't. I mean, I know it's thinking a bit outside the box as well with the targeting as well.
So just let's bring things to a close then. So some key takeaways from this campaign, and then bringing it all together. I'm going to ask you about that as well. So if I've got this right, Clark, so key takeaways, your learnings from this, it's really about giving campaigns time to run so you can gather enough data and then be willing to change your creative vision. And I think we find that people are either not interested in the creative at all, and okay, whatever, I just want to get this outcome that I'm after, or they really love it, oh great, I can make video and social media content, this is really exciting. What other sort of learnings did you have from this particular campaign with HDC?
Yeah, I think it's become friends with your website developer, because then these things are much easier. So I don't know, flowers, chocolates, whatever it needs to make that process as easy as possible. That's something I definitely advise doing, because again, you're going to get that data after the ads, because the ads have then done their job. I mean, the ad, you could say, oh, the ads job is just to get the click, and then once that's done, it's up to the website. But you want to do more than that, and I think, like you said, variables, test things, but test it in a scientific, sensible way that you can draw good data from. I think that's really important. And actually, I know it's the really boring stuff, but I don't, because I love it. But it's really important to do that, because then you've really got things to test against. Whereas if it's too many variables, too many things changes, too many things going on, you just kind of at the end going, well, it kind of worked, I guess. Yeah, it did. So it gives you much more ability to, particularly when you want to change creative as well. I've got more of a case to go and say, well, we tested this properly, and I can definitely say this. So it's, but yeah, there's lots of things to do.
And actually those suggestions, they apply not just to this particular campaign, but more widely as well. Yeah. So it's really useful. Thank you. And then, so Marisa, just a couple from you then, thinking about content and testing and refining and looking data and all these kind of things. So any sort of key takeaways that people can quickly scribble down before the end of the session?
I would say, don't be afraid to try something different as long as it feels true to what you do. Empower your team. So whether that may be upskilling or bringing in a wider team, or, it's all doable. So be realistic, but also aspirational, I think is fair. And then of course, be authentic. I think the more people are following, so actually people don't really want to see you hard selling your products or whatever. They'd like to see behind the scenes and what feels close to your brand. And so that way people don't really like to be preached to on social media, but they just want to get to know you better, and how are you going to solve their problem, or, that sort of thing. And don't just jump on trends just for the sake of it. But if you could think of a way to capitalize on a trend that feels right to you guys, well, then spend your energy there.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you so much to both of you for sharing all of your learnings and experiences from this. As I was saying at the beginning, connect with us on social. We're on it way too much. Connect with us on LinkedIn. We're always around to answer any questions. We've also got a download, which is a social media checklist. So that's quite a good way of taking a fresh look at your social media and just, just improving a few things in a few areas here and there. And our website is sookio.com. So have a look on that, find out a bit more about what we do. And yeah, we love talking about data. We love talking about campaigns. We love talking about clever creative. So do connect with us, and we'll always be around to answer any questions that you've got. Okay, thanks a lot then. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.